Good afternoon, folks. We're out here at the beautiful Maple Hollow Park on the Key Peninsula. It's kind of one of those gray July days, but pretty pleasant to be out here on the low tide compared to some of those hot weather low tides that recently happened. And for those of you tuning in, hi, this is Tina. Got my pencil in my hair. We've been collecting data all morning, and I'm excited to show you some fish that we caught. So let me flip back around and we'll take a peek. So Mike's out there cleaning our seine net. And for those of you tuning in, if you want to let us know where you're watching from, and if you have any questions, we'd be happy to answer those as we go. So the seine is kind of cool because it's a way to study and get an idea of the species that live in the nearshore environment in different habitats. And so a cool species that we came across today, a little tricky to catch, but this is a pipefish. These are seahorse relatives. You can kind of see that similarity of their face. This one's a male, so like seahorses, the males carry the eggs, and so you see this big brooding pouch here, full of little tiny baby baby pipefish. So we'll get him back in the water. We have a couple of those, and then we have a much harder to catch shiner perch, and you can see them swimming circles around my hand. This one-handed business is tricky, but we got you. All right, so this is a shiner perch. You can see that it has those really faint yellow bars. Typically they're a little more bright. And Indiana, hooray, it's great to have you here. But yeah, not a ton of fish today. And a surprisingly little amount of algae typically for kind of this late summer. Usually we're like huffing and puffing hauling that net because it's so full of this green stuff. This is a mix of sea lettuce as well as Ulva intestinalis, and you're seeing also a lot of sand dollars kind of mixed in throughout. We are noticing, unfortunately, a lot of dead sand dollars, which is kind of a typical beach thing, but with that really hot heat spell and the low tides, we're wondering if we're seeing, if not these like dead sand dollars on the top of the beach, some of them look like they've kind of been parboiled in the sand. And so like we're seeing things like this, where you can tell that the sand dollar is freshly dead. It's lost its spines. It still kind of has some of that purple color to it. The ones that have been dead for a longer time kind of fade to this orangey yellow. Another animal we're seeing a lot of that didn't do well in the heat wave is these heart cockles. And again, we're at Maple Hollow Beach Park. I'm going to kind of just scan across the beach and you'll see all these big shells here of this animal that definitely maybe got taken advantage of as somebody's lunch. But we don't typically see this many heart cockle shells on this beach, and we've been coming here for quite a few years now, but you can see that it's called the heart cockle because it has that heart-shaped kind of side view. This is the Ruffles potato chip of the clam world with those nice steep ridges. But yeah, just looking out, you can see heart cockle shells all over the place. So that's kind of unfortunate. We have seen some live ones though, so the nice thing about our intertidal friends is they've been doing this for probably a long time, right? So they've been out on our beaches, and as tough as a big heat wave like we had recently was, these are some resilient animals with amazing adaptations for surviving in these places. So let's take a look at what else we can find. Looking here, nice big rocks typically are fun places to take a peek. You can see underneath the rock there's a little Metridium or a plumose anemone dipping its tentacles into this little pool of water. It's kind of fun. Probably the grossest thing we found today was in the +1 tidal height area. We do some surveys where we're looking at the number of species found at different tidal heights, and there was some pretty dead chitons that were very smelly. I can find a live chitin for you to show off that, because thankfully you don't have smell-o-vision because they are smelly when they're not alive. So here's the chitin I'm talking about. These ones are alive and well, so nice to see in those lower zones. These animals are just fine, thriving in this intertidal habitat. But I just think these woody chitins are so pretty. That cool 8-plated shell, the girdle, and that ability to really stick to the rocks. Next to this chitin is another one of my favorite animals, the flatworm. Use my pencil to kind of scooch it along, but you can see this little blob on the rock is absolutely alive. There's actually a couple. There's one here, there's one there, there's another over here, and then there's a second chitin. So we like to say all you need is a good rock to find some of those creatures. I'm also seeing some hermit crabs, the limpets. That's definitely an animal in the higher intertidal zones that we saw a lot of dead shells. So they maybe didn't enjoy that low heat wave. I'm also noticing right here, this is an egg case from a midshipman, which looks like hopefully it hatched. One thing about rocks like this is I'm not going to leave it rolled over. Since I investigated it, I'm always going to put that rock back how I found it. So I'm going to flip that back over nice and carefully so that those chitins have a good chance of staying alive for another swing of low tides. You can see the meter tape. It's getting wound up. This is a patented technique where you hold it with your foot and reel it through the water, making sure that no sand gets wound up. So if you're ever dealing with meter tapes, now you know. We also have Steph out here helping us collect data. So it's a skeleton crew today. So I'm glad for all of you who are joining us. Just kind of take a peek at the beach today. We're gonna get back to work measuring some oysters here in a moment. If I didn't know this was a place that people come to harvest oysters, I might be more concerned about the population here, because you can see there are indeed a lot of empty shells. But we also saw a lot of, getting out of myself. We also saw a lot of live oysters, so that was encouraging. Although in that high zone up at the top of the beach, there were some oysters that had popped open and probably parboiled in the heat. But overall, it's a little smelly at the beach, but I think we fared pretty well in the South Sound compared to some of the reports that are coming out. So here you can see a nice live oyster with that ruffled shell, tightly closed together, letting me know that this is a living species still, or a living individual. I like to look on the oysters to see if there's other oysters present. I have to gloat that you'll see those little flags out on the beach. Those are some oyster shells that we put out to study the recruitment of Olympia oysters. And I found my first Olympia baby oyster yesterday while we were analyzing those. Oh, got that on tape. Nice. That was our fish bucket. Don't worry, no fish were harmed. I can't promise that the barnacles didn't fare well. Anyways, but yeah, so, these shells are a good place for baby oysters to settle out. And so we use a dissecting scope to scan the shells that are out on those strings, and we look at the underside of the shell, so kind of like here, and we see what's living. And we've been seeing lots of baby jingles. Those are animals that live in the lower intertidal zone. They're a bivalve with 2 shells that like to live on rocks, and they are all over these shells, even though we can't see them with our naked eye. Also some baby limpets, which are really cute. They have a little spiral to their shell. But yeah, what was very exciting to see was some baby oysters in yesterday's monitoring of that. So excited to keep doing that throughout the summer into September and see if we get more recruitment of our native oyster species, because this is of course a Pacific oyster, which we noticed in, I guess, the winter 2015-2016, that the temperatures got warm enough for these to naturally or to be able to spawn in our waters. And so while we seed the beaches with this species because they're tasty and they grow fast, so this nice big oyster is of harvestable size. And so ideally the Puget Sound is cold enough that they're not able to spawn naturally, but we had the blob and more heat waves. So kind of the hope with our community science beach monitoring is that we can better understand the changes on our beaches. And so oysters is definitely one of the things that we've noticed kind of populating these beaches, and we hope that the Olympia oyster can get its foothold back as well. So for Judy, sharing the love with the sand dollars, this is absolutely a great place to find, I don't know, thousands of those. So even though I don't know if you're worried that the poor sand dollars in that heat wave, there's still plenty of living ones, which is great to see. So good, so good. And again, it's just kind of one of those beautiful gray summer days here in the Pacific Northwest. So for those of you tuning in from far away, maybe you can come visit sometime. Go on a beach walk. But for now, we really appreciate all of you kind of tuning in and engaging with our digital beach walks. It's a fun way for us to bring the beach to you wherever you're at. And yeah, I think we'll go investigate one more rock before I wrap up here. Actually, I'm gonna get distracted by some seaweed. This is maybe another species that this one is looking kind of bleached out. This is a red algae called sea noodles. It's kind of like a springy rubber band texture, and I would imagine, it probably doesn't taste as carby delicious as actual spaghetti, but you can see how it gets its name because it is very noodle looking, kind of those thick blades with this tiny branches. There's another species we call witch's hair that I'm not seeing currently, but we saw it earlier somewhere. But the algae's fun. But let's look at this, back to this rock. I'm trying to find a good one that I can flip without harming myself or the creatures under it. This one's calling to me. I can give that a little turn, see if there's anything cool. And it looks like we have an awesome frilled dogwinkle. This is one of our larger marine snails. Of course, not as large as the moon snail, which is another animal that maybe didn't tolerate the heat wave so well. We found a couple empty moon snail shells, so bummer to see that. But here's a nice snail. You can see that it is closed up the trapdoor here with its operculum. That's something that it grows along with the snail to help protect it from predation. So again, just really delighted that there's all these cool sea creatures out here that have the adaptations to withstand things like heat waves during the midst of a low tide. And so while I was expecting to come to the beach and just see absolute carnage, I am delighted to say that that is not the case. There is certainly still a lot of creatures out here that are alive and doing well. We'll just kind of tuck that back how we found it. And yeah, some happy seagulls too, because in the wake of disaster, they got some cockle snacks, so good for them. Okay, one more cool thing before I go. The tubeworms here are pretty fantastic. So this is a spaghetti tubeworm, which you might look and just be like, what are these piles of shells on the beach? These are indeed the worms that use the shell debris to make this case. You can kind of see into that hole. An animal called the spaghetti tubeworm would stick out its spaghetti looking like tentacles. I'm noticing a noodle theme right now. A lot of things on the beach are noodly, but this is a cool tubeworm that we find a lot of here, as well as these little banded tubeworms. Once you start seeing them, you can kind of just look across the beach and they're everywhere, especially in that sandy area. Anything that looks like a little stick sticking out of the sand is likely a tubeworm. And with that, I hope that you get to go out on a nice low tide, do some noticing, do some wondering. Mike and Steph are out there doing a sea star survey, so that's another thing we're looking at, is the populations of sea stars on our beaches. I personally haven't seen any sea stars today, which is a bummer because they're one of my favorite finds. They're really, I like having them pull my knuckle hair because they have cool adaptations to pinch things off their skin, which is also their gills. So again, with that, I'll leave you with kind of the hope that these animals are out here doing awesome, and stoked to have all these folks tuning in, and we'll leave you with this beautiful view of the water. And I don't know if we'll get lucky and see the harbor porpoises again that we saw earlier, but there's a cool rock. Yeah. And of course, as always, Harbor Wild Watch is a nonprofit, so we greatly appreciate any donations, whether that's your time to like, follow, comment, share, all that good stuff, as well as financial donations. So we appreciate that too. And okay, Judy, I'm gonna get your question in here before we go. I did say banded, so kind of like if we look, let's see nice and close, you can see the little, it almost looks like bamboo, but there's another tube worm that we call the bamboo tube worm. They have a sandy case that they make. So to kind of differentiate that, I call this one the banded. It's technically Spiochitopterus, but I'm not gonna expect you to remember that because that's a mouthful. And then I'm noticing one more tube worm. This one's the parchment tube worm. So you'll notice its case is more kind of like a parchment texture. So all sorts of cool species out on the beach, rocking and rolling. Okay. With that, appreciate you all tuning in, and hope you have a great rest of your day. We'll watch that heron as it flies us out. So cheers, y'all.